In January 1984, a commercial motel along Interstate 45 in Houston, Texas was quickly wrapped in concertina wire to hold 87 people under guard. That makeshift motel conversion was the birthplace of an industry that now manages over 100,000 secure beds across America. Today, two massive corporations pull in a combined $4.38 billion in annual revenue by renting cell blocks back to the government. But behind these massive numbers lies a business model that is surprisingly fragile, relying on specific contract clauses that penalize governments when crime rates drop. While the business seems like a guaranteed goldmine, a sudden shift in political policy can turn these high-security assets into empty, multi-million-dollar liabilities overnight. To an outside investor, a private prison looks like the ultimate defensive real estate play. Unlike hotels or apartment complexes, your tenant is the state or federal government, meaning your rent checks are backed by the Treasury. You don't have to worry about occupancy drops during recessions, because the demand for prison cells is historically decoupled from the economic cycle. The dream is simple: build a secure facility once, sign a 20-year government lease, and collect steady, recession-proof cash flow. Private operators promised they could build prisons faster and run them cheaper than the public sector, saving taxpayers 10% or more. Yet the reality of building and financing these facilities reveals a financial barrier so high that only a few players can ever get in the game. If you want to build a medium security prison from scratch today, the capital requirements are massive. A standard 1,500-bed facility requires an upfront investment of at least $150 million. Designing the physical structure itself to survive extreme wear requires reinforced concrete, high-grade security steel, electronic gates, and double perimeter fencing. According to public data, the construction cost alone ranges from $125,000 to over $300,000 per bed. Every single cell can cost as much to build as a modest suburban home. Beyond the walls, you must install commercial-grade HVAC systems, heavy-duty kitchen facilities, and secure medical wards. Medical units alone must comply with strict federal healthcare standards, adding millions to the build-out. Then there is the land itself, which must be large enough to accommodate the facility, recreation yards, and parking, while remaining close enough to major roads for transport. Municipal permits, environmental impact studies, and local zoning approvals can drag the pre-construction phase out for years. During this time, you are burning cash on engineering, legal fees, and architectural designs without a single dollar of revenue. Even a temporary setup, like the motel lease used in Houston in 1984, requires immediate capital for security upgrades. Security electronics, camera systems, and heavy locks must be installed before you can house a single inmate. High-limit liability insurance is another major expense that must be secured immediately because of the inherent risks of holding inmates under guard. Advanced systems, including biometric scanners, infrared cameras, and electronic gate controls, must also be factored into the initial budget. These systems can easily cost $5 million for a single facility. Working capital is another major hurdle because government agencies are notoriously slow to pay. Developers need a cash buffer of at least $10 million just to cover payroll and food shipments for the first 90 days of operation. Without this buffer, a delay in state funding can force you into technical bankruptcy before your first year is up. Because traditional commercial banks are increasingly hesitant to fund these controversial projects directly, developers have to turn to complex, alternative financing network. Historically, you could easily walk into an investment bank and secure a commercial loan for prison construction. Recently, major financial institutions like JP Chase and Bank of America pledged to stop financing private prison operators. To bypass this roadblock, developers turn to municipal bond financing. Under this setup, a local county government issues tax-exempt bonds to fund the construction of a prison. Local governments then lease the facility back to the private prison company, which operates the facility and uses its revenue to pay off the bondholders. This structure allows private developers to secure low interest rates while shifting the debt burden onto the public book. For example, a rural county might issue $100 million in bonds, hoping the prison will create local jobs. Successful operations allow the lease payments to cover the debt. Should the facility sit empty, the taxpayers of that rural county are left holding the bill. Another common financing method is using a real estate investment trust or REIT. REIT structures allowed companies to own the physical real estate of the prison and lease it to an operating subsidiary. Tax savings from this setup saved the companies millions, though both major operators eventually converted back to standard corporations. Once the financing is secure and the facility is built, you must prepare for the crushing reality of monthly operating costs. Operating overhead is dominated by four main categories: labor, liability insurance, utility bills, and basic inmate care. Labor is by far your biggest expense, accounting for roughly 60 to 70% of your total operating budget. Securing a 1,500-bed facility requires an army of correctional officers, shift supervisors, administrators, and medical staff. Public prisons typically hire unionized correctional officers with pensions and high benefits. Private operators cut this cost by hiring non-union staff, offering lower starting wages, and reducing training hours. High staff turnover is the immediate result, with annual rates often exceeding 50%. Recruiting and basic training expenses are constant just to keep your shift staffed. Understaffing also leads to safety issues, which directly drives up your second largest overhead cost, liability insurance. Prisons are high-risk environments where simple mistakes can lead to multi-million-dollar lawsuits. Riots or medical neglect lawsuits can trigger insurance premiums that reach hundreds of thousands of dollars a month. Direct care represents the next physical cost of keeping inmates alive. Feeding and providing medical services for 1,500 people must happen every single day. Food services are usually outsourced to massive catering companies, which keep costs down to less than $3 per inmate per day. Healthcare is much harder to control. Aging inmate populations mean your medical costs will rise every year, as treating chronic conditions requires expensive specialized care. Utilities like water, heating, and electricity run 24 hours a day and can easily cost $100,000 a month. Lights and heating must remain on even if your prison is only half full. Maintenance costs are also constant, as inmates cause heavy wear on plumbing, doors, and security systems. Annual maintenance capital expenditures at CoreCivic facilities range between $30 million and $35 million. Broken security gate systems must be repaired immediately regardless of your cash flow. With such high fixed costs, your survival depends entirely on the specific terms of your government contracts and how your revenue is calculated. Before we look at the actual profit margins, there is one hidden clause in these contracts that critics call a low-crime tax. This clause is the occupancy guarantee, which ensures the private operator gets paid even if their cells are completely empty. Most private prison contracts contain these guarantees, which typically range from 80 to 100% occupancy. 90% is the most common occupancy threshold. Sentencing reforms that reduce the prison population below the guarantee don't save the state money, because they must still pay the private operator for those empty beds. Oklahoma and Louisiana, for example, signed historical contracts requiring occupancy rates of 98% and 96% respectively. Taxpayers make up the difference if occupancy falls below those rates. Per diem rates represent the core revenue stream of this business. Governments pay the operator a daily rate per inmate, which typically ranges from $60 to $150. In 2024, CoreCivic reported an average revenue of $102.79 per compensated man day for its safety segment. All operational costs, from guards to meals, must be covered by this per diem rate. Revenue diversification is another strategy operators use to boost their numbers. They offer inmate transportation services, electronic monitoring systems, and residential reentry centers. Tracking individuals outside of physical cells using electronic monitoring services allows companies to charge daily fees with very low overhead. While these diverse revenue streams sound highly lucrative, calculating the actual net profit after paying down debt shows why this industry isn't an easy path to wealth. Staggering raw revenue figures often mask the thin margins of the business. Total revenue for CoreCivic in 2024 reached $1,961,600,000. Operating income was only $153,800,000 after paying for labor, food, medical care, and general overhead. Calculated operating margins thus sit below 8%. Interest expense is the real drain on these profits. Heavy debt from prison construction means interest payments eat up a massive portion of the operating income. Net interest expense at CoreCivic alone reached $67,400,000 in 2024. Final net income was $68,900,000 after accounting for taxes and all other expenses. Profit margins for the company were only 3.5%. The Geo Group walked away with just $31.9 million in net income from $2.42 billion in revenue, representing a net margin of under 1.4%. Thin margins mean that even a minor decrease in occupancy or a small rise in labor costs can instantly push the business into a net loss. Break-even thresholds typically require a private facility to maintain an occupancy rate of around 70 to 80%, depending on the contract terms. Falling below this threshold quickly drains cash reserves, while the fixed costs of security and utilities remain. Political and demographic factors beyond your control will ultimately dictate the long-term survival of the facility. Passive cash flow is a myth when it comes to owning a private prison. It is a complex operational puzzle with thin margins and high regulatory risks. Only operators with massive scale and the ability to lobby for favorable policy decisions can survive in the long run. Smaller operators simply can't absorb the liability costs or survive a single cancelled government contract. Executive orders threatening federal contracts make even the industry leaders vulnerable to sudden shifts in policy. Speculative gambling on political trends and crime rates is the reality of the entire industry. July 2026 marked a major milestone when CoreCivic finalized the sale of 2 immigration detention centers to the federal government for a staggering $1.5 billion. Real estate assets, rather than ongoing operations. proved to be the true source of value in this massive exit. Yet the market has evolved completely from its modest origin. Concrete and steel cell blocks have completely replaced the temporary motel along Interstate 45, and the 87 individuals who slept inside that first converted motel are forgotten, leaving behind an industry where human confinement remains a line item on corporate balance sheets.